Following the fall of Cherbourg on June the 26th and Caen on July the 9th, the Allied lodgement area in Normandy was secure. To enable the Americans to break out on the western flank, it was now General Montgomery's intention to draw the bulk of the German armour opposite the British Second Army. Accordingly, he instructed General Dempsey, the commander of Second Army, to attack with the 3 armoured divisions of General O'Connor's 8th Corps across the Caen bridgehead. Beyond the bridgehead was open country. Air reconnaissance photographs of the area had been studied in detail during training in England, and the country seemed eminently suitable for an armoured attack. The attack was codenamed Operation Goodwood. According to Allied intelligence, the attacking force could expect enemy opposition in a defensive belt 3 miles deep, screened by second-class formations. With its left-hand boundary on the river, the 16th German Air Force Division was thought to number about 2,100 men. It had second-class infantry divisions either side of it. Somewhere just south of Caen, it was believed that elements of another division were stiffening 16th German Air Force. It might be 192 Panzer Grenadier Regiment or Battle Group Luck, both detached from 21st Panzer Division, a formidable opponent which was thought to be the immediate armoured reserve with elements as far forward as Caen. There was some mystery about the location of 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, and 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend. It was believed that they had been withdrawn into reserve, but it was not known where. If the resources of 1st, 12th, and 21st Divisions were concentrated, the attack could expect to meet anything up to 250 tanks. Against this enemy, the 8th Corps was to launch its 3 armoured divisions, the 11th, the Guards, and the 7th, into the open country which lay due south of the Caen bridgehead. But there were 3 problems. First, the Caen bridgehead was so small that only the leading division could be across at H hour. Second, the southern boundary was protected by minefields laid by the 51st Highland Division just after D-Day. Uncharted and overlooked by the enemy, they could not be cleared. And third, the advance would be restricted by the outskirts of Caen and the Bois de Bavent to a front of 2,000 yards for some 3 miles. The plan contained a massive preliminary air bombardment by some 2,500 aircraft, a comprehensive fire support plan by about 450 25-pounders and about 300 medium and heavy guns, with additional support from the fleet at sea, and flanking attacks by 1st British Corps and 2nd Canadian Corps. The key to the ground to the south of the bridgehead was undoubtedly the Bourgebus Ridge. Thus, the leading division, 11th Armoured Division, was directed towards Bras and Rocancourt, with its Lorried Infantry Brigade occupying Couverville and Demouville en route. Cagny was to be masked until the Guards' Armoured Division, the 2nd Division to advance, appeared. The Guards would secure Cagny and swing eastwards to Vimont. Finally, the 7th Armoured Division would advance between the other 2 divisions to Cramenil. Beyond this, the armoured car regiments would fan out and operate in a wide semicircle. H hour was to be 0800 hours on the 18th of July. At 2¼ hours before H hour, 1,100 RAF bombers would attack these targets. 1 hour before H hour, 480 American medium bombers were to drop fragmentation bombs here. From H to H+30, 540 American heavy bombers would attack these additional targets. All this time, 300 fighters and fighter bombers were to attack further targets and carry out general interdiction. At H hour, the 11th Armoured Division was to advance behind a barrage, moving at 150 yards per minute, fired by some 200 guns. Just south of the Caen-Troan railway, the barrage was to stop for 15 minutes, and then it was to continue southwest for 2,000 yards. Additional concentrations and barrages would support the flanking corps as they attacked, and 3 heavy regiments were to harass the villages south of the Caen-Vimont railway. In all, it was to be the heaviest concentration of artillery and air support for a ground attack that had been mounted to that date. As it moved towards the concentration area, the 11th Armoured Division consisted of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, the 2nd Fife and Forfar Yeomanry, the 23rd Hussars, and the 8th Battalion, the Rifle Brigade, in 29th Armoured Brigade. The 3rd Battalion, the Monmouthshire Regiment, the 4th Battalion, the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, and the 1st Battalion, the Hereford Regiment, with the 2nd Independent Machine Gun Company of the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, formed 159 Brigade. The 2nd Northamptonshire Yeomanry were the Armoured Recce Regiment. Although they were only trained for reconnaissance, they were equipped with Cromwell tanks which were more suitable for armoured warfare. The Inns of Court were the Armoured Car Regiment. In addition, there was artillery and sapper support normal for a division at that time. The division was commanded by Major General Roberts. At the time of Operation Goodwood, he was 37 years old.
Now, I would like at this time to give you a rundown of the morale and the training of the divisions taking part and their attitude to the prospective operation. Now, 11th Armoured Division was originally formed by General Hubbard, who had formed the 7th Armoured Division in Egypt, and then came back and formed the 11th Armoured Division. So you can take it that 11th Armoured Division was very well trained and raring to go because they had already been got ready for North Africa and then were stood down with great disappointment, and now they were all ready to go. They had no battle experience until they came to Normandy, but they had already had one battle called Operation Epsom, which was a rather frustrating battle, but nevertheless gave them some battle experience. There was one regiment which had battle experience, and that was the 3rd Tanks, who'd had a great deal. But they had a very good commanding officer and some good squadron leaders, and they were able to hold their end up with the tremendous élan with which the other new and fresh regiments were producing. Now, in 8 Corps in England, we had studied the country over which we might operate on the invasion, not only on maps, but also on extremely good air photographs. And we'd all come to the conclusion that if we had to operate, we hoped we'd operate in the area of the open, rolling country southeast of Caen. And here we were faced with an operation over that particular country. Of course, the fact that the Germans appreciated that it was a good tank country, too, perhaps we did not consider too heavily. Now, the Guards Armed Division. This was to be their first battle. They did not take part in Operation Epsom because they hadn't arrived in time for that battle. And as far as I know, nobody in the division had fought in armor before. But they had been in 8 Corps with us, and they had done similar studies of the ground and the enemy opposition, such as we knew about it, with us at the same time. So they had a view on the battle much the same as ours. Were raring to go and show what they could do. Now we turn to 7th Armoured Division. They were quite different in this way that they had fought in all the desert campaigns. They had then fought in Italy. They had come back just in time for Christmas and had some nice leave. And they were, I think, with so much experience, they were a little too wary, not weary, too wary and a little too canny. And they certainly did not have the same enthusiasm for this battle as either ourselves or the Guards Armed Division. Now, a word about the plan. The original plan, when given to me, was that we were to be responsible for taking the 2 villages of Couvreville and Demerville, and also Cagny. Now, I didn't care for this very much, because to take Couvreville and Demerville, it would be necessary also to take some woods to the east of the first village, and it is clearly, at any rate, a 2-battalion operation. And then to do that, I should have to leave an artillery regiment, which normally worked with the infantry brigade, and I would also have to give them some tank support. So right at the outset, I was going to be minus almost half the division. I therefore remonstrated to the corps commander that this was going to be the situation and would be a severe handicap to my further operations, as it were, with one hand behind my back. In addition, I'd been given Cagny, and I thought that would delay our advance onto the objectives which we had been given, which were on the right or west of our advance. However, the corps commander wouldn't agree to relieve me of the first requirement, that is, taking Couverville and Demerville. I represented this problem verbally and also in writing, and finally was told that if I didn't feel it was a sound plan in view of the experience I'd already had of armed warfare, then he would get another armored division to lead. So, of course, I undertook that particular task, and we remained the leading armored division. But there was one amelioration, and that was that instead of having to take Cagny, I was only required to mask it. Now, as the tale unfolds, you will see how unfortunate that decision was by the corps commander, because although he didn't know it, it did, and it was going to have a considerable effect on the operation as a whole. Now you must hear how an armored regiment was organized and how it operated. And to tell you about it is Major Bill Close, who was a very experienced armored regimental man. He saw action in France in 1940, then in the desert, and then to Greece, and then back in the desert again, and then in Normandy.
In July 1944, I was a major commanding A Squadron, one of the 3 Sabre squadrons of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment. Each squadron consisted of a headquarter troop of 3 tanks and 4 fighting troops of 4 tanks. The troops were equipped with 3 Sherman tanks fitted with 75mm guns, and 1, the Firefly, a 17-pounder. The Sherman was a very reliable tank mechanically, but we were completely outgunned by the 75mm long and the 88mm guns of the German armor. To give you an example, the Sherman 75mm couldn't hope to penetrate even the side plates of a Panther tank at ranges over 500 yards. The Firefly, on the other hand, was a much better tank, but the German anti-tank gunners had cottoned on to the presence of the Firefly and used to pick them out first. So, to counter this, we echeloned the Firefly behind the 3 Sherman 75mm as we advanced. Each squadron had an attached motor company drawn from the 8th Rifle Brigade. Our particular company was G Company, commanded by Major Noel Bell, and David Stileman commanding 11 Platoon, and he is the man who will tell you more about the composition of the company.
You've heard from a distinguished divisional commander and also a gallant, battle-experienced squadron leader. And now to the other end of the social scale, a mere platoon commander, aged 20, but sylph-like at the time of Operation Goodwood. I commanded 11 Platoon, G Company, 8th Battalion, the Rifle Brigade. The company commander, Noel Bell, was everything and more that a young officer could hope for in action. A motor company was attached to each armored regiment and consisted of a scout platoon of 3 sections, each of 3 carriers, and there were 2 carriers in the scout platoon headquarters. There were 3 motor platoons, each of 4 half-tracks, and in company headquarters there were 2 half-tracks, a scout car, and 2 further carriers that had 3-inch mortars carried in them. We also had attached to a motor company 6 towed 6-pounder anti-tank guns, and they came from the support company. So you can see that there were an enormous number of specialists, such as wireless operators, drivers, and gunners, at the expense of riflemen. We in 8RB had the bloodiest battle inoculation possible during Epsom operation, which took place on Hill 112 west of Caen. And after a few days, licking our wounds, we were prepared for the next task that should come our way. Although we knew something big was in the wind, we hadn't the foggiest idea as to the size and complexity of Operation Goodwood.
The order of battle of the other 2 divisions, the Guards Armoured and the 7th Armoured, followed closely that of 11th Armoured, and it was this force that was to break out of the Orne bridgehead on the morning of July the 18th, 1944, and penetrate the German prepared defences assessed by Allied intelligence as extending only 3 miles in depth. In fact, they extended some 10 miles onto the Bulgerboost Ridge and indeed beyond it. There were 4 belts of prepared defences. First, the expendable infantry, 16 German Air Force Division in this case, with 272 Infantry Division newly arrived, relieving elements of 1st SS Division and 21st Panzer Division in the Faubourg area. The second line of defence commenced 2 miles south of the start line and was based on a series of self-supporting villages a mile or so apart. In each of these villages, there was to be a battery of 6 anti-tank guns and 25 infantrymen. Running along the crest of the ridge was the third line of defence, which included 44 88mm flak guns. In addition to these flak guns, which were dual-purpose anti-air and anti-tank, were 60 to 80 artillery pieces and 2.5 brigades of Nebelwerfers. To the south of this third belt, if the British armour were to penetrate that far, was the Mobile Reserve, the Panther Tank Battalion of 1st SS Panzer Division, some 50 to 60 tanks, plus 2 battle groups of 12th SS Panzer Division. Perhaps the only element which these formidable defences lacked was minefields, a rather surprising omission in view of the importance that the enemy attached to the area. Colonel von Luck, responsible for the immediate defences in front of 8 Corps, has stated his reasons for this apparent omission.
Minefields would not fit into our mobile defense tactics because they would hinder our own movements.
At the age of 33, Colonel von Luck was an experienced commander, veteran of German campaigns in Poland, France in 1940, Russia, and the Western Desert.
I was the commanding officer of 125 Panzer Grenadier Regiment and a divisional battle group. We were very familiar with the ground because the 21st Panzer Division had fought east and west of Orne River since D-Day. Just before Goodwood, our division was in position in great depths east and west of River Orne, with left the 192 Panzer Regiment and right my battle group. Units of the 16th Luftwaffenfeld Division were under my command. This Air Force Division was built up and formed from workshop companies, clerks, and cooks who changed their spoons against rifles, and therefore not very familiar with the infantry battle. They had to protect us from surprise and British patrol. My battle group consisted mainly of my own regiment 125 in positions behind the thin screen of the 16th Luftwaffenfeld Division, with the 2nd Battalion in the area of Touverville, Sannerville, Emyville, and the 1st Battalion on the left in the area of Couvaville, Giberville, Demoville, Le Mesnil-Frémantel was their headquarters. Both these battalions in block positions to be able to build a defense screen or to counterattack. Additionally, a naval warfare battalion around Granteville. Secondly, the main anti-tank defense units we had was a self-propelled assault gun battalion 200 commanded by one Major Becker.
Major Becker was a reserve officer who had been an industrialist and engineer. He had a mechanical inventiveness that soon turned into a remarkable talent for improvising self-propelled guns and reconnaissance vehicles from captured chassis. He had demonstrated his talents as early as 1940 in France and Holland. Later, he was ordered to make more to assist Rommel in North Africa. During 1943 and 1944, the 21st Panzer Division made use of its time preparing for the invasion by putting Becker to work to build a self-propelled assault gun battalion from captured enemy tanks in French factories. Although Major Becker is dead, he kept detailed records at the time, so let extracts from these take up the story.
The self-propelled armored gun group was a trial unit with the purpose of obtaining a concentrated fire effect whilst in action. Each battery was furnished with 6 75mm guns. The front shields were 40mm thick. Furthermore, 4 105mm guns were attached to each battery. These guns were constructed for direct fire, but were capable of firing indirectly. So the 105mm guns were positioned some 500 to 1,000 meters behind the 75mm anti-tank guns. From advanced positions, the commander of the battery was able to direct the action of every gun from his scout vehicle by means of wireless transmission. The fire effect of the group was very high grade, mainly because wireless sets of the latest design were available. These sets enabled us to escape enemy targeting by using very low frequency and relaying through many tanks.
On July the 17th, Major Becker's guns were situated behind the screen of 16th German Air Force Division, with number 1 battery in Demoville, number 2 in Giberville, number 3 in Granteville, number 4 in Le Mesnil-Frémantel, and number 5 in Le Prieur. Finally, as an immediate tactical reserve, there was available the 1st Battalion of 22nd Panzer Regiment with 22 Mark IV tanks and the support of 503 Heavy Tank Battalion equipped with 36 Tiger tanks. Lieutenant von Rosen, 20 years old, was acting company commander of the 3rd Company at that time.
The 503 Heavy Tank Battalion consisted, apart from its supply and workshop elements, of 3 combat companies, each of which was initially equipped with 14 Tiger tanks. The Tiger was at this time the heaviest German tank. The 1st Company had the Tiger II, so-called Königstiger, and the 2 others, the Tiger I. The Tiger I had for 2 years proved superior on the Russian front over the Russian tanks. The armament consisted of 2 machine guns and 1 88mm gun. A word about the crews. They were all men who had considerable experience at tank fighting at the Russian front. Everyone in a Tiger battalion was specially trained and understood every aspect of their job. Everyone had already served in a normally tank battalion. Looking back, the type of man we had at our disposal was certainly better than in normal tank units. The battalion was an independent battalion of the Army Reserve and was assigned to a division for a certain period for employment at the point of the main effort. Once a particular mission was accomplished, it was moved to other critical points. That was the reason why the battalion was moved in the beginning of July 44 from the Russian front, where it had been engaged in heavy fighting, to Normandy. My company was in Maniville, only 3 miles behind the front line. We were in a state of permanent readiness to be employed as intervention reserve. In my opinion, for this task, a battalion was located much too far forward. We, that is my battalion commander and all the company commanders, were fully aware of this and had continually represented that we should be in a position further back from which we would be able to move to meet the weight of any eventual enemy breakthrough. But all our representations were turned down by higher authority. We were under the 21st Panzer Division. Our last frontline mission had been near the Colonel factory on 11th July. There, my company had stopped a local attack and in the course of 20 minutes killed 12 German tanks and captured 2 intact. On 18th July, of my own tanks, 12 were combat ready and were placed well camouflaged and dispersed in the park of Maniville. We dug foxholes under each of them, in which part of the crews were sleeping.
So, on the eve of Goodwood, when the 3 armoured divisions were concentrating for the attack, the intelligence picture of the likely opposition was greatly different from the actual German defensive situation. In addition, 2 other advantages lay with the defence.
First, the ranges of our 2 most successful anti-tank weapons were about 1,500 meters for the anti-tank gun 75mm long and about 2,500 meters for the 88. And second, we knew that the British were bound to attack in this sector.
So as 8 Corps moved towards its assembly area, it was already outranged by the German anti-tank defences and was to be denied both strategic and tactical surprise.